All right, 3, 2, 1. There we go. All right, well, welcome this morning to El Paso Bible Church in our Sunday School Hour. We're continuing our study in the book of Exodus, and we are approximately chapter 10. The way the narrative works, we do a little bit of review, but I just want to remind us, because this hardening of Pharaoh's heart is a big deal for a lot of people's theology. There's two statements, of course, in general, two categories of statements. And Scripture says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and God says, I will harden his heart, or in this case, in chapter 10, I have hardened his heart in a perfect, what we call the perfect tense, something that was done in the past. I've already done this. But the most recent category in which God has spoken about Pharaoh, Yahweh has spoken about Pharaoh, was in chapter 10, verse 1. And it says, Then Yahweh said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh, because I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them. So what is the purpose at this point of God hardening Pharaoh's heart? In this instance, from this point forward, it is a testimony, right? So that he can perform signs. What is the purpose of signs in Scripture? Essentially, to validate a message, right? To validate truth. And there are dual audiences here, right? There's both Israel, which is the object of God's salvific efforts, his deliverance from Egypt, in this case, a physical deliverance, but it's also a testimony to the people of Egypt, so that Egypt would know his name, so that the Egyptians would, as is intended of all the nations, as desired of all the nations, would come to a knowledge of who Yahweh is and how they place in his plan, and to turn from their idolatrous religions. And so he's saying, this is providing an opportunity. I've done this because I need the opportunity to do these signs among the Egyptians, among them, the third person. I want to do this among the Egyptians. So that's important, because nowhere, by the way, is there a sentence of death pronounced on Pharaoh. There isn't. Why? Well, you know the story. Why does Pharaoh die? Because he's a big fat dummy. And he goes and chases Israel that God is clearly delivering. And he's such a dummy that he goes into the middle of a miraculously separated body of water and thinks it's not going to collapse on his face. So nowhere is that pronounced. That was him doing that. This isn't designed to send Pharaoh to hell. This is designed to keep a bunch of people from going to hell. This is designed to keep a bunch of people from to inspire a bunch of people to acknowledge who Yahweh is and his superiority to all other beings that they worship, including Pharaoh himself. So that's in chapter 10, verse 1. So you remember, at this point, all of Pharaoh's servants are like, hey man, you need to let these people go. This is a lot worse than anything that they could bring upon us otherwise. We are starving. We are starving. We haven't had a ribeye in forever, right? All the cattle died. We still probably got stinky piles of frogs all over the place. And then he brings in the locusts, right, to come in here. And they ate everything. This is like, okay, so they took away Texas Roadhouse, right? All the cattle are gone. Texas Landing cattle, whatever you want, wherever you go for your steak, cattlemen's, right? Some of us like to drive all the way down into Fayette. You know the exit is closed, so it adds like 20 minutes to the drive to get to Cattleman's because there's no exits out there. You got to go way past and then turn around if you want to do that legally. So God closed down Cattleman's, and now he's getting serious. He's closing down Super Salad. You know, Super Salad didn't survive the pandemic, by the way, just in case y'all were really in a pinch, and you need to go find some salad. But that's what the locusts are doing. The locusts come in and they destroy every plant of the land and all the fruit of the trees that managed to survive the hail. Remember, the hail came in. By the way, this is an interesting parallel. What brought Israel into the land of Egypt in the first place? A famine. What do we have now? A famine. So we have a parallel here, kind of a bookend. This is a precursor to bringing Israel out of the land. They came in as a family. They're going out as a nation. And remember that Pharaoh calls for Moses and Aaron at that point. And he calls them before him in the midst of this massive conflagration of stupidity on his part. And he says, therefore, please forgive my sin just this once. How do you like that? Stand up for the very mouthpiece of God. Remember, God said to Moses, you will be as God to Pharaoh. Imagine standing before God and saying, God, please forgive me this one thing. Only this one thing. That's all I'm asking for. I'm only asking for this one sin. Please fix this little problem that I have. And make supplication to Yahweh your God. Remember, now he's calling him by his first name. In this culture, right, you would only call your greatest enemies and your greatest friends by their first name. You would only remove this death from me. So Moses goes out, we're at verse 18 or so, makes supplication to the Lord. So the Lord shifted the wind, right, and took everything out into the Red Sea, all the locusts. But remember, Yahweh had said, I have already hardened his heart. Perfect tense. I've already done it in the past. It's done. And he did not let the sons of Israel go. So I think we covered all of that last time. But that's where it is. We're at the point that I believe you could say that Israel is convinced, right? And from this point forward, from chapter 10, the point is no longer to convince and convict Israel of what God's intentions are for them. It is now to be a testimony to Egypt and a testimony against Pharaoh. But chapter 10, verse 21 is the next plague. There's no warning given for these, by the way. He doesn't say in 3 days or 2 days or 7 days for this one. So then the Lord said to Moses, or Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be grasped, touched, felt. You reach out and touch it. I just came back from a place where you could do that with the humidity. San Antonio was as bad as San Antonio has ever been. It felt like Beaumont on its best day. You know, been to Beaumont on its best day? No. San Antonio's worst day is about like Beaumont on its best day. Anybody from Beaumont? I just like stepping on toes. Nobody from Beaumont? Nobody even been to Beaumont? You're not missing a whole lot. Okay. Bill's been there. Well, y'all are from down there. Yeah. It's only a little ways outside of Houston. Houston is even better than Beaumont in that regard, I think. But imagine a darkness that can be. Now, we live in the land of 324 days of sunshine. I think it is on average every year. We live in a technological world. Have you seen those pictures, right, where you can see communism versus capitalism at night at the satellite pictures? North Korea is dark, right, and everywhere else, and those places that are currently ruled by communism are dark as can possibly be. And we don't understand what real darkness is. In the ancient world, they did. They understood what darkness was because they didn't have all the light pollution that we have. And it is actually a pollution. I think we don't see with our eyes what we would have seen under the natural created order with all of this light around us. But imagine being able to reach out and touch the darkness. Imagine how terrifying that would be. I mean, there's more description here. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. There are a few times in my life where I have had a really rough 3 days. Last November, I had COVID for 3 days. Well, I had it for longer than 3 days, but it hit me for 3 days, and my wife will tell you I was flat on my back. She probably thought I needed to make sure that the life insurance was paid up because Nothing keeps me flat on my back for 3 days. Nothing. Broken limbs have not been on my back for 3 days. Had surgery, has not been down for 3 days. Probably not since I was a young child and was hit by a car have I been down on my back for 3 days in my whole life. Frustrating, right? But this is the envelope of darkness that had descended on the land of Egypt for 3 days. And it says they did not see one another, nor did anyone arise from his place for 3 days. They just lied down in bed, couldn't move, disoriented. They're not bats, right? They don't have echolocation ability. But all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. What does that tell you? That means it wasn't just the sun, it wasn't just a big eclipse. They couldn't even light a candle or a lamp. What kind of environment can you not light a candle in? A vacuum, like space. The vastness, like just in this, there was something tangible that was preventing them from visually, it struck the entire country literally just blind. But not in Goshen. The line was drawn. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, "Go serve Yahweh, only let your flocks and your herds be detained, even your little ones may go with you." But Moses said, "You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice them to the Lord our God." You know, that reminds me of, and I may get in trouble for this, but you remember in some states in this last pandemic, right? Yeah, you can go to church, but you have to be quiet. You are not allowed to bring the sacrifice of praise as part of your worship. You are not allowed to sing to the Lord, but you can meet. Oh, thank you, you benevolent, beneficent, governmental entity. It's a good thing we serve men and not God. Huh. Oh, wait, I got that back. Y'all should recognize I got that backwards. That's not what Scripture says. Now, I will admit to being a natural-born contrarian. I don't think I was just being a natural-born contrarian when I told them to stick that one. I mean, like in Texas, we did not have that problem here in Texas. But a lot of my friends suffered under that in ministry, various places. Moses says, you have to let us take sacrifices and burnt offerings. By the way, this is pre-law. So don't get confused in the chronology here. The 10 Commandments are still future. The Mosaic Law, the 613 mitzvot, the commandments, I don't know if that's the accurate count, but that's what somebody counted up one time and we all repeat. Maybe commentary tradition, I don't know. Something like that. That doesn't exist yet. But Moses knows, and the people of Israel know, that they need to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. That was a precedent set way back in early Genesis, right? When Abel brought the acceptable sacrifice from the flocks. It was a precedent set actually by God himself in the garden. Don't go too far with that. But God clearly slew animals in order to clothe Adam and Eve when he sent them out of the garden. I heard people get their, well, let's just say they got a little bit of their knickers twisted over whether that actually was the first sacrifice or not. Sacrifices frequently are not offered by the person who they are made to. Like there's some ambiguity there. But it was an example. It was an example of the placement of propitiatory sacrifice in God's plan. So they knew that they needed to be able to sacrifice at this point, essentially a free offering. Sacrifice them to Yahweh our God. Therefore our livestock too shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. For we shall take some of them to serve Yahweh our God, and until we arrive there, we ourselves do not know with what we shall serve Yahweh. This is, I don't know. We just drove through like a ton of feedlots going to this convention in Lincoln, Nebraska. You know, you drive through a lot of cornfields and a lot of cornfields, a lot of lots. One of the things that people don't realize is that even though we have cattle cars for trains and trucking containers that are designed to efficiently haul animals, there's mortality to it, right? And so anytime you have a drive for flocks or herds, anytime you're taking them somewhere, they get bruised, beaten, battered. I mean, so Moses is not being silly here. He's an experienced shepherd, by the way. He had four decades of shepherding under his belt. He's saying, look, we don't even know what's going to be acceptable until we get there, however far we're going. So you have to let us take all of them so that we can have adequate sacrifice. But the Lord had hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Beware, do not see my face again. For in the day you see my face, you shall die." It's an interesting threat. Remember, who is as God to the other in this scenario? Moses is as God to Pharaoh. So anytime you have Pharaoh doing that to Moses, just think about some idiot human standing before the Lord Almighty, before the God that created the heavens and the earth, and saying, "If you see my face again, big guy, you're going to die." Moses said, "You are right. I shall never see your face again." Now the Lord said to Moses, "One more plague I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely. He's not going to ask you to leave any of your valuable possessions behind. He's not going to qualify it at all. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold." They're going to go and just ask. I wouldn't recommend just going and doing that. There are basically three precious metals: silver, gold, and lead, right? I like that line. I forget what movie it is. Is it in, they're kind of run together, but somebody rustles John Wayne's character's cattle. And the rustler says to him, "These are mine, I bought them, but you can buy them from me. Did you bring any gold? Did you bring any silver?" "Nope, just lead." I like that. Wouldn't suggest necessarily. Can you imagine a rustler saying that to somebody? "You can buy your own cows back from me." You're out in the middle of nowhere talking to John Wayne. Who are you? Anyway. This is unique, right? This isn't, when I was a kid, I was actually sent out. Somebody actually knew their neighbors. My best friend Jeremy's house, I was sleeping over at his house, and his mom asked me to go to the neighbor and borrow a cup of sugar. Now, isn't that quaint? That just doesn't happen anymore. She knew her neighbor well enough, and I said that if Mrs. Ng was asking for a cup of sugar, she would give it to me. I borrowed a cup of sugar. I did not go and ask her for 5 ounces of gold, so I don't think that she would do that. It's unique. This is miraculous on its own. Why is silver first? Well, in large portions of human history, silver was actually more valuable than gold. They were both the value, but now, I mean, gold is what, $26 an ounce, and gold is like $1,800 an ounce. We have it flipped from most of the time in human history. Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, because that's the only way this is going to happen. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt. That's miraculous, isn't it? The guy who sat there and waved his staff at the sky and brought down tangible darkness on 3 days and kept everybody in their bed. They couldn't light a birthday candle. The guy who stretched out his hand and the locust darkened the sky and ate everything that the hail hadn't already destroyed. Who raised his hand to the sky and everybody's cattle dropped over dead. He's greatly esteemed in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. But remember, that was the point. 10:1, God said, I have already hardened Pharaoh's heart so that I may perform these signs in the land of Egypt. So God accomplished what he set out to do. That shouldn't surprise us. As Moses was standing here as a delegate from Yahweh himself, a personal delegate in a sense, what we would call an apostle, right? In the New Testament, we would say this person was commissioned and delegated directly by God himself from the bush over his own objections to fulfill this ministry. And he was greatly esteemed both by Pharaoh's servants and the sight of the people. I think that is the people of Egypt, not the people of Israel, because normally the sons of Israel, the people of Israel, is made explicit in Exodus, in the Pentateuch particularly. But Moses said, thus says Yahweh, about midnight I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. By the way, somebody asked where were the horses and where were the cows later on in life and how much time this took. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is actually kind of a long process. I haven't heard of somebody giving an exact chronology, but essentially a cow's gestation is about the same as a human's, about 40 weeks. So there's some time involved here. All the cattle were destroyed previously, right? So we have that here as well. He's pronouncing this, all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. All the animals, the king's son, the prince, the slave girl's son, child, firstborn. That's a parallel, right, to the promises that God made and reiterated to Israel that would not take place in the land of promise. And he said, you're going to go to the land of promise. There are certain things, if you do what I say, these are the blessings that will follow. This isn't going to happen to you. You're always going to have a firstborn to receive the inheritance. It kind of goes with the territory because this is a heritage forever, right? The promise given to Abraham 400 years before this was land, seed, blessing forever. So you have to have an heir forever. Each family in Israel, each tribe would have a heritage forever. And the picture here is when you set your face against Yahweh, he is sovereign over that, right? Egypt, I can destroy Egypt's heritage like that. You will have no firstborn. Cease to exist. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as never shall be again. God is placing the oppressors, in this case, in the position of the oppressed. What did God tell Moses over and over and over several chapters ago? I have heard the cries of my people Israel. I have heard the cries of the sons of Israel in the midst of their oppression. I have heard of the cruelty that they're experiencing, and now I am remembering my promise to them. But against any of the sons of Israel, a dog will not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these your servants will come down to me and bow themselves before me, saying, Go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. What's it going to look like that all of Pharaoh's servants are going to come? It's going to look like God said it would look. They're going to come before Moses. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. As a recap, right? Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, yet Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Is it a just course of action that God is following? Did he give him a shot? Did he give him a chance? Gave him more than I'd give him. It's just. All the signs were given there as testimony. Remember, the signs were given to prove the validation, or prove and to validate a testimony or a promise. We see this in the Old Testament and the New Testament both. That was the purpose of those things. It was to say, look, this is true. This is why it was such a big deal. You remember Simon Magus, right? Simon Magus was a believer when he made this stupid request. He went to Peter and he said, I want to buy your ability to do that cool stuff. Why was that a big deal? Well, because then he'd have the ability to validate any claim, any promise, any testimony he wanted to make. He was a believer, he was just the dumb one. That's not something you ought to seek after. If God wants you to validate your testimony with something like that, he'll give you the ability. You ain't going to buy it. And yet we see that propagated all over. You have all of the head slappers, right? Call them all sorts of things. I call them head slappers because when I was a kid, I used to flip to the TV and I'd always watch people like Benny Hinn slap somebody on the forehead and they'd fall over and they'd get healed. Dummies. Trying to validate every stupid claim that they made. That's why it was a big deal. God provided the signs. He validated his testimony against Egypt and for Israel. And so we're not going to lay the culpability for this carnage at God's feet. Ultimately. Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. So here's an ordinance that he's setting up. This didn't exist before. They knew they were supposed to go out. They knew they were supposed to sacrifice. They were supposed to offer of their free will a bloody sacrifice. They had understood that precedent and what was acceptable. This is a precedent for an ordinance. It is to be the first month of the year to you. So they still set this calendar, right? They have ways, right? And if you've watched, I know Steve and Janice are watching this show too, Stitzel, right? Every once in a while it comes up as that. These aren't Messianic Jews, by the way. These are Haredi, of the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. And you'll often hear a conversation on the phone, what day is that? Oh, no, give me the Gregorian date. They distinguish to this day between the calendar that God set way back here. This is the first month of the year to you. So he's setting an ordinance. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them, according to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. This was an important thing. And I don't know, I was taught that it was a matter of cost when I was a kid, that it was if they were too small to be able to afford a lamb. But I don't think that's the issue. The issue is how much can you consume? Because they were supposed to eat the whole thing. Right? So they're supposed to eat the whole thing. So if you take a whole lamb and you only have 3 people in your family, that's going to be hard to follow. So God is understanding of that. You have to sacrifice the whole lamb, each one for his family, but you can share it if there's not enough of you to do that. We're going to find out, right? So you're supposed to divide it that way. Not necessarily cost. It reminds me of back, I used to serve a church where we did a common cup. And the common cup for communion, you all know what that's a reference to, right? We didn't have the little plastic cups. This was a pandemic nightmare. Can you imagine the tizzy everywhere? We'd have to become the prosperity preachers and raise people from the dead. They'd have a heart attack right in the carpet if we did a common cup now. But we did, and we used wine for that. And I remember one Sunday, because we did this every week, we did a weekly communion. It was not a bad thing. It was actually a good thing. The only hard part is that not everybody liked wine. And so we'd have this whole thing full of wine, and in most places, it was the pastor's custom. I was the associate pastor. That following kind of a liturgical pattern, they didn't dump any extra wine down the sink. They were supposed to consume it after it was consecrated. And he said, guys, you got to take a bigger sip because I have to drink this after the service, and it's a little too much. This is a concern that comes up. If you're going to command the people to not leave anything till the morning, there has to be enough. The portions have to be appropriate. And I can eat. Steve has watched me eat a 32-ounce ribeye, didn't you, Steve? Yeah, I didn't eat any beans or potato with that. But so what's that? You did trim the fat. Did I? Well, I wasn't following God's perfect plan, was I? Oh well, keto wasn't a thing, maybe, huh? We all know that fatty part is healthy for you. Anyway, didn't eat the bone. It says, your lamb shall be. I could have. Cattleman's makes a good steak. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. So they were right. So we can't transport these and make sure, unless we take all the herd, we're going to have that. They knew it needed to be unblemished. But here's some specifics. It's going to be a year old. Unblemished. Now, unblemished, I think, does have a general meaning of being unbruised or unwounded, whatever. But also, if you take my meaning 4-H people, it wasn't supposed to be cut either. Supposed to be an intact male, a year old, okay? Unblemished. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation is to kill it at twilight. So like when I make a cabrito in my backyard, which I do on occasion. Similar, right? It's not a year old usually. It's milk fed because it's tasty that way. And I cook the whole thing. You know what happens with my neighbors? I got neighbors sticking their cameras over the fence, videoing this big redneck making cabrito in his backyard. That wasn't going to happen because everybody was supposed to be doing it at the same time. This was a community event. I don't know if they all did it in the same place at the same time, but they were supposed to do it at twilight on the 14th day. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the house in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails. My favorite part of the goat, the entrails. Yuck. Here's the thing. You take a year-old ram. I mean, he's a lamb at that point. He's young. He's intact. He's going to be tough. You know, this is not supposed to be that enjoyable of a meal for you. You're not supposed to boil it. No crock pots allowed. That's the boiling, right? You're supposed to roast it with fire. This is a preparatory meal. But it was quick, right? It's a lot quicker to put a steak on the grill than it is to put a pot roast in a crock pot and get it done properly. So you don't have time for that. You're going to eat it with unleavened bread. You're going to eat it with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw, which, by the way, is very traditional. In traditional cultures, when they kill an animal, they'll go ahead and eat the organ meats right out of the animal. Hot, steaming. That's the part that goes bad the fastest. You roast it. You should not leave any of it until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Now I'm going to call some of y'all out here, I guess, because some of y'all take the steak and burn it with fire before you eat it, and that's not according to the plan. Right? You don't burn it before you eat it. But God is not wasteful, right? He wants to divide it up against portions. Whatever is left, you burn it up. You shall eat it in this manner. Actually, why would they do that? Why would God declare that they would not leave any of this lamb meat sitting in their house after they left? Isn't that frustrating to you, fathers? Two things get dads. Really get their goat, right? Leaving the lights on. Tim's laughing here because I'm calling him out here. Leaving the lights on and leaving food all over the plate, right? It's one thing if it's boxed macaroni and cheese, you're throwing out a nickel's worth of noodles, but, it's a roasted lamb or steak or something like that. Why? Well, what was the judgment that God had placed on Egypt? Artificial famine, essentially, right? Struck all their cattle, struck all of their crops, struck all the fruit of their trees. They got piles of dead burning frogs all over. I doubt they could even fish in the Red Sea after all the locusts got dumped in it. There might have been so many locusts, it just killed all the fish. You know what happens when they have an algae bloom and it sucks all the oxygen out of the water? They weren't supposed to alleviate the famine with what God had preserved and provided for them. There are not supposed to be any leftovers for people to scavenge out of it. That was consecrated to the Lord and to the people. I'm not going to die on this hill, so as I say, don't try to kill me there. But they're not supposed to leave any leftovers for people to come and scavenge what the Lord had provided. You shall eat it in this manner. With your loins girded. That means your belt cinched up, not like you guys at Thanksgiving. Keep your belt cinched up until dessert, and then you uncinch it. Because you got to prepare to not be able to move for 4 or 5 hours after that Thanksgiving meal. No, you keep the belt cinched up when you eat it. Girding your loins. Sandals on your feet. No puppy dog slippers. You're not going to bed after this. And your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. By the way, phrases like that indicate to me we have a bad habit of assigning complete and utter vanity to idolatry. There is a being that they're worshiping. The little piece of firewood that they carve his likeness in is vanity, but there's a being that they're worshiping. Because God doesn't fight emptiness. He is executing judgment against the gods of Egypt. Why would God need to execute judgment against a piece of firewood? If the idol was all there was to it. Yes? No? Right. There's a war taking place here. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the house where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Blood is a propitiatory element on their house. Whose responsibility was it to make sure that the blood was on the door? The fathers, the nation, the leaders of each father's household was responsible for that. Now, we're not Israel, right? Have you ever painted blood on your doorpost? They still do that, by the way. Unfortunately, this is an issue in a lot of Europe, actually, that and it affects both Muslims and Jews. That the means used to slaughter animals in a kosher or halal way, or the observance of the Passover, is actually outlawed. They can no longer slaughter animals in a way that is necessary for this. To remove the blood from the animal entirely and to utilize it this way. It's their responsibility to do that for the sake of their household. I'm just reminded, guys, that as fathers, as husbands, as spiritual leaders in our home, our disobedience has dire consequences for those in our household. If the firstborn son was 5 years old in a household where the father was foolish and disobedient, he was struck dead because he failed to obey. In Goshen, a place where the darkness hadn't struck, where the cattle were still alive, where they had the firstborn of their cattle still alive, where they hadn't been touched by the locusts, and where their grapes were still producing fruit, or their pomegranate trees. But not for this one. Our obedience matters. This day, we're over. 2 minutes ago we had 10 minutes. We have 0 minutes now. We have negative 2 minutes. All right, we'll continue on here with verse 14 next week. Any questions or comments, observations? Yeah, Diane. Uh-oh. Who were they? I take them to be rebellious, fallen, angelic beings masquerading as deities. And I think we see evidence of that throughout all of the ancient Near East. So the question was, who were they? They're counterfeits. They are created beings superior to human beings. So they're able to deceive.
They also worship cats.
Right. So they worshipped as the images representative of the gods they worshipped. They worshipped flies, they worshipped cats, they worshipped other animals, they worshipped animals that they created out of their mind's eye. But what I'm saying is just like the firewood that Isaiah talks about, right? Isaiah says, well, with one piece of the firewood they cook their breakfast, and with the other they make the god that they worship. All of those lesser created things are representative of the higher created being that they're in fact worshiping, right? They didn't do that just because they woke up and decided a frog was worthy of praying to. There was some kind of evidence of that in their collective memory at minimum, right? That's why we see that collective memory in other pagan cultures that are out there where they have signs and miraculous wonders that are given testimony to in their history. And that's why God has chosen in these plagues in Exodus, very specifically the plagues, that he's going to strike the Nile, which was itself representative of a god that they worshiped. He's going to strike them with flies, with frogs, all that. He's going to demonstrate his sovereignty over not just those animals, but the worshiped beings, the counterfeit deities that they represented. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, yeah, Bill. I'm sorry?
They were pantheistic.
Yeah, they did. They believed that there was pantheistic and what we would say panentheistic. They believed that God was all things, but also that God was in all things, if that makes sense, if they were not representative of that. But in real terms, they are in fact worshiping in the same way that people in the tribulation will worship a counterfeit Christ. They were worshiping a counterfeit deity that impressed them. I mean, during Revelation, we saw that the beast was that the servant of the beast is going to create like an animatronic beast. It's pretty impressive, and they're going to come worship that too because people are dumb. I mean, they're going to come worship the lesser because the real thing is too scary for them. Essentially, they won't approach that. But we're foolish to think that the God of this world is nothing. The God of this world is the God of this world. The prince of the power of the air is the prince of the power of the air. He's not nothing. It would be really easy for him to have victory, right? If we just all assume that he's nothing. Should we assume that the Communist Chinese Party is nothing? Even though it's false in its own religion and its own world order? No, but it would be foolish of us to think that it's not powerful. Just because it's false and counterfeit, right? As an illustration. So anyway, all right, we're now 5 minutes over. So if you have questions at this point, get with me afterwards or by email or a phone call. Father, we thank you for this day. We do thank you for your word. We thank you for the evidence of who you are in every word of the pages of your word. We thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness to your promises to your people. And we thank you for your grace to us. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.